In a world where Hollywood movies have sucked for over a decade, two men have done the unthinkable. They've started their own production company from nothing. Welcome to Unpacked.
Well, welcome everybody to the very first episode, the inaugural episode of Unpacked, the official podcast of Packed House Pictures, which we will tell you all about here shortly. I'm Matt Raney, and this is my co-host, friend, and colleague, Jason Kiesel.
Hello. How are you doing?
Jason, how are you today, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's a warm day here in Austin. It's like I walked outside. It was like 70 degrees. It's nice.
It's cold and rainy in LA. How about that? Although that may, maybe that just kind of is a perfect encapsulation of the mood here in LA anyway, but we can talk about that here in a second. But for those of you who are joining us, maybe now or in the future, we are two guys who have decided, as our intro said, to start our own production company with nothing.
We thought it was a great idea to start making some movies. I mean,
we did.
We just hear it's such a great business to be in. It's a fantastic business. You make money everywhere.
Yeah.
Like you just make a movie and you're just like swimming in cash. So that's what we heard. So that's what we're doing.
But really the reason that we're kind of starting this podcast is that we are doing this crazy thing and we're going on this adventure, and we wanted to give people a chance to kind of follow along with what we're doing and maybe, if you want to do the same thing, learn from some of our mistakes, or, perhaps you hear about us and you're interested in kind of joining in and helping in whatever way you can, or just being a fan of what we do and supporting the films that we hopefully will be making in the very near future. But I guess to start out, the question that people might be asking is like, why did you do this crazy thing, and what made you think you could do it? People start businesses all the time. You have actually successfully started a business a couple of times, and you've sold your business a couple of times.
I have.
I guess maybe I'll pitch it to you first as, why did you decide to join me in this crusade to make independent movies? Like what made you think it was a good idea, or just what was it about the idea that excited you? Like, why did you decide that you wanted to do this?
So after I sold my company for the second time, I took some time off. This was October, November. I officially got terminated November of 2022 after the acquisition of the company.
You say terminated like it was that makes it sound like they gave you the boot, but like
they did. Oh my God, it was funny. We actually had a rolling bet as to how long I would last before they noticed, because we signed all the paperwork, I think in June or July. And then we had to wait for SEC approval for antitrust, whatnot. The transaction was large enough that it had to go through antitrust, DOJ approval. And during that time, I basically wasn't doing anything. I'd attend some meetings. I was a C-level executive, so I'd go to the meetings and I'd, pontificate on this and that. But like really, I had been stripped of all my direct reports. So I had like nobody reporting to me. I only reported to the CEO, and he didn't care at this point. So it's like, so we had a bet as to how long would I last. And I thought I'd last until like January, February. So the DOJ actually approved it in October. And again, I was never even contacted by the company. I got an email. I got like a form email that said, "Oh, here's your new email address." So I got that. And that was about it. I was never invited to any other meetings, nothing. And so I'm just collecting a check for I'm like, oh man, how long is this going to go? And sure enough, apparently they did a budget. They had a budget meeting month. So it took them a month to figure out, that I was just burning cash on their books, and I was gone. So after that, it was like, okay, what do I do? I took some time off, really just kind of trying to reflect on everything. You go from basically nonstop meetings, and work and travel and this and that. We had just acquired a company like right before we got acquired. So like there was a lot of work in doing that. I was heading that up. I was head of M&A. So, you go from everything to like nothing. And it's it's a very strange feeling. You lose track of time. Even now, I have trouble kind of figuring out what day of the week it is because, we're working on Packed House and some other stuff, but I work at home. I don't go to an office. We don't have like the regular, weekly stand-up meetings that we did. We're just doing our thing and whatnot. But that was something that was really interesting about going from something to nothing. Like your calendar just gets emptied and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And we had a conversation. I don't know when it was.
It feels like it was like 18 months ago or so. It was
in 2024. And we actually started the business in September of 2024, but the conversation happened before that. And in between basically, January of 23 and mid 2024, I was just doing nothing. I was, trolling people on X and Twitter and, but I got so bored. It was like after 3 months, you're just like, man, like I got to get out and do something. So I was like thinking about what am I going to do next? I can do software. I can write another, start another software company. I thought about starting kind of a micro VC fund. I thought about starting an alcohol like related business. I'm super into whiskey, as you can see behind me.
Whatever do you mean?
And you gave me a call because I was still going back and forth to LA and we were playing volleyball on the beach. And so we were interacting quite a bit. And when you called me, you said, hey, I got an idea for business. I want to run it by you. I mean, it was just really interesting. So it kind of, for me, hit that nexus of technology and film. And I'm a huge fan of films, especially films for me that are nostalgic, which is 80s, 90s, and 2000s. I still go to the movies, now, but it's haven't been to the theater in quite a while. But I do, I watch almost everything on Netflix, Hulu, Paramount, HBO, etc. So I do enjoy content and long form storytelling. And the concept that you came to me with was pretty interesting. It was like, hey, let's see if we can make an independent film with no money, starting with essentially nothing. And that was really interesting to me. So, it's a challenging problem. Is there a market for it? There's a lot of questions that we're going to be answering, I think, as we go along in this journey. So, that was what was compelling to me. It was for me, it was something different. So it's not just writing software, selling to the same customers that I had before, which I could do and I would probably be mildly successful at. But it's just kind of rinse and repeat. And I wanted to do something new. So this was something new. Still allowed me to flex my technology chops and get involved in the film business, which I grew up in, basically. I mean, I lived in LA for 30 years, from 1992 to 2022. And you meet a ton of people, writers, directors, actors, wannabe producers like myself.
Well, and I think what's interesting about what we're doing, and I'll work my way back to when I called you, but it's not that we're just trying to make a movie. It's not like we've just got this idea for a movie and it's like, well, we want to finance this movie and make this movie. Really what we're trying to do is figure out and unlock what the new model of independent film is. And that in all kinds of formats, whether, for your phone, whether for your theater, whether for your home screen television. Like we're trying to figure out and create a model that basically allows artists more freedom to make the movie that they want to make or the content that they want to make for less risk is basically what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out, and also a way to make it more honest in terms of the way it pays out to people on the back end. Like that's kind of our big overall vision is sort of like, how can we make a small, nimble, agile film company that creates content powered by artists, a script first kind of mentality that keeps accurate books and pays people properly if there's a profit and mitigates the risk so that it by making less expensive films, but also by the way that they're funded. In theory, and I mean, and of course, as we meet challenges, but we're perhaps finding out, how difficult, those things can be. But that's sort of our mission in a nutshell. And you come to the company from a really a business angle and a business side of things. You created your own company. You're a very successful software writer. You were involved in MySpace in the early days. You made your way and made your fortune, in the business world. Me, I came at things from the writing world. I started my journey as an artist, if you want to use such an obnoxious term as that. It feels so obnoxious to say, but
you're an artist. I think I'm an artist in some degree too, right? I mean, anytime you write something,
when you create
or
things, right?
something.
When you create something, so I wrote novels. I wrote novels for sort of young readers, and I won some small awards, and I toured schools and things like that. And then realized at some point that the financials of the novel world were probably not going to pan out for me. Like, and this is probably something that we'll kind of talk about as we the financials of being a creator are changing rapidly and have been changing, for the past decade or two. But now the change is happening, so much more quickly. But I decided to try and transition into film and television. And so I stopped writing novels and geared myself almost entirely towards that world and had some success. I wrote for a show on CBS called Bull. I wrote 2 seasons of an audio drama that were, are on Spotify and Apple and all of that sort of thing, and have written, ghost written for directors and written for films that are in various states of production and that sort of thing. And at some point realized that if you really want in this climate to get something made, you kind of have to do it yourself. It's getting to that point where so few projects are being greenlit, and there's so much competition for eyeballs from YouTube, TikTok.
Yep.
And of course we'll get into all that kind of stuff because we're very interested in that kind of world as well. But, there's an appetite for movies that just didn't feel like they were getting made anymore. Like, it just feels like, if Hollywood's going to make a movie, it's going to be based on IP that already exists.
Well, they're trying to de-risk it, right? I mean, that's what they're essentially doing. They're trying to de-risk their product pipeline, right? I mean, they don't want to take a risk on kind of new, kind of, I don't want to say innovative, but like something that's brand new that has never been out there before, not based on a book that's a bestseller, not based on a comic character or a superhero. Those are the things that they tend to gravitate towards. And that's the gap that we'd like to help fill, along with folks like Blumhouse and A24 and these other ones that we're basically filling in that gap, right? I mean, the average budget, I think, of a big Hollywood film is north of 50, probably closer to 100 million for their film.
Yeah. And I don't think we have any sort of idea or concept that's like radically new or different from things that people have done either in the past or are doing now. But we're passionate about film. We've got that going for us. But we also feel like there's still a way to mitigate risk, because to be fair to Hollywood, they're absolutely right. Like, it's hard to get people to watch something. It's hard to get people to like something and glom onto it and make a fandom out of it. But the crazy thing is like all these sort of nerddoms that are out there, all of these nerddoms were really founded on something that at the time, at one point, was just this movie that somebody made or this TV show or something that was a risk because it wasn't based on any IP, So, obviously I'm excluding like the comic book movies, but like, you look at like the Star Wars, the Star Treks, the Highlanders, the
Indiana Jones,
like all of these
Back
were
to the
original
Future,
ideas.
like
they were original ideas. And like, you look at them and it's like, well, time travel is not an original idea. It's not like Back to the Future invented time travel, but it told the story in a unique, fun way that moviegoers really enjoyed. And we will talk about movies kind of as we go through our podcast, but we want to mitigate risk by trying for original ideas that cost less And I
Yes.
guess that's the other half of the equation about why we think we can do this. Like why, we were explaining why we did it. Like I'm passionate about telling stories, and wanted a way to do that without all of the gatekeeping and mountains to climb that exist in modern Hollywood. You wanted a new challenge to build a new business that about something that you enjoyed. Whether it was going to be whiskey or movies or something like that.
Yep.
But why we thought we could do that now is interesting also, in just that the costs for creating content have plummeted, in terms of like your equipment costs, what you could do in camera, on screen. Those costs have in a lot of ways really come down. The tools that are out there that you can use to sort of empower a smaller group of people to do something bigger, have never really been more available than they are right now. But also kind of the ideas and the connections socially that are out there. I guess a bedrock of sort of our concept or ideas is really finding film fans before the movie is made and involving them in ways that will help fund the movie itself. I hesitate to use the word crowdfunding just because I think that gives people a certain sort of impression, but offering people a slate of movies that are in certain stages of funding or being funded in certain ways and giving them the opportunity to participate, whether it's just in terms of buying a ticket early, buying some merchandise early, choosing from a lineup of movies instead of like, we're crowdfunding this movie, be a part of it or not. But also giving
them a choice on what gets made or not made, essentially. What we're interested
but
in.
also giving people the opportunity to get behind the scenes and be a part of the movie making process. We think that all of that is maybe part of, if not all of, the future of independent filmmaking, is like it becoming a more community-based kind of thing. So, that's what we're doing. That's kind of why we're doing it, and why we think we're able to do it. And we look around the world and we see, hopefully, what are some examples of what's possible when people take on that indie spirit. For example, Anora, which recently won Best Picture and was made for like $6 million. Yeah. And I think talking about a movie like
and it was
Anora,
made in the U.S.
Yeah, made in the U.S. It's a fun movie, but there's a lot of interesting things about it. Like, Anora is about things. Like, I think it does have some things to say about people and the world, but it's not like a message first movie. It's really, it's a story about this girl and, kind of her hopes and her dreams, and watching those hopes and dreams and her kind of her vision of herself, get built up and then broken down, over the course of the movie, but in a very entertaining kind of way, like in a way that's really kind of funny. But a movie that was not made for a ton of money that still looks really great.
Oh, it looked fantastic.
Looked fantastic, and they shot in a ton of locations. So what was the budget for that one? $6 million? Is that right?
$6 million.
Yeah. And what did it end up grossing? I think Emma put that together for us.
I think it was 48. I want to say. Let me look up the.
And look, they spent. I think something you and I are learning in the very beginning of early efforts is just that you absolutely have to spend more on marketing than you spend on making the art. Like that's a massive cost. Like it's the distribution company ended up spending a lot of money on Anora to try and get it nominated for Best Picture.
It was an $18 million campaign to win the Oscar.
Think about that. That's 3 times more than what the movie actually cost, which I think is just sort of indicative of it's indicative of a couple of things. I think it's indicative of the bloat that's in Hollywood right now. That I think that there's that part of it where it's just sort of like, that the lengths that you have to kind of go to get the right people to say the right thing about your movie, and not necessarily trusting an audience to have the reaction to it that you hope that they will. But I think on the flip side of that, it's very indicative about in the current world of social media and television and film and all that sort of stuff, just how hard it is to get people to watch something and to get people to pay to watch something. Like,
Yeah, there's a
and
lot
it's
of
hard.
noise, right? I mean,
There's a ton of noise.
And when you think about the landscape now versus 10 years ago or 15 years ago, how did people find out about, really interesting films that were coming out as, trailers, like they'd be in the theater and you'd see a trailer.
Yeah.
You'd see advertising, bus stand billboards, you'd see regular billboards. It's a little bit like this is going to sound weird, a little bit like a presidential campaign where you really just kind of have to outspend the other person to get visibility,
Yeah.
to kind of float up to the top of people's kind of mind and trigger that, like, oh, that looks interesting, I'm going to go see that, or I'm going to go watch it on streaming. But that's, it's how does an independent film compete with a big studio that's got a $50 million budget for P&A?
Well, I think that's the other part of the thing that is that in the days that we were talking about, in the days you and I were growing up and enjoying movies, even before then, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the aughts, like films would stay in the theater for a really long time. Like, a really good movie,
like 2 to 3 months at
oh,
least.
way longer than that. Like a really good movie might stay in theaters for a year. I mean, especially in the 80s, like, and part of that was because that there were, a smaller number, and I say smaller, relatively, like there was a smaller number of theatrical releases at that time, given the number of screens, like they could afford to stay there longer. But also there was a slower transition to it being essentially free entertainment, right? Like, not only would you stay in the theater for a really long time, but then you would go to a VHS at one point.
Blockbuster.
Blockbuster,
Hollywood
rental,
Video.
and then of course DVD and Blu-ray when those came along. And then, when the film cable channels were out, HBO, Cinemax, all those sort of Showtime, and they were really premium. Like your first opportunity to watch something at home without going to rent something where you were paying a monthly fee, would be a year and a half later, but you were paying for that monthly subscription for HBO or whatnot, and now there's just, not only is it blink and you'll miss it in the theater, it gets tossed into the tsunami that is streaming entertainment right now. And so I think a big part of what you and I believe, and maybe a big part of the reason why we're doing this podcast, and, is that this idea of building a community where, and I think A24 has done this to a degree, and Blumhouse has done this to a degree, where there's a community of people who follow these production companies in a way that you might follow an actor or something like that, and look for their product and go and view their product in the theater, or go and look for it on a streamer. And so I think essential
you see that
to what
with directors,
we want to do is,
I mean, right?
Yeah,
like there's certain directors, like obviously Spielberg is one that people like to watch, Scorsese, and on the kind of the big Marvel side, there's who are the big directors of
Jon Favreau and the Russo brothers. But I think what we would like to do, in theory, is build a community around Packed House, where film goers and movie lovers can find us and follow us, and we can therefore present to them, writers and directors and actors that maybe they haven't heard of before, who don't have a huge following themselves, and become a sort of pipeline of films to indie film lovers, that to be quite honest can't compete with the $100 to $200 million movies that are out there, and so we know that that's going to take a lot of time. Like we certainly know that it's going to be an uphill climb, and that it's going to take marketing dollars. But I think that really, that is what we would like to do, and that is what we are in the process of doing. And we've, fortunately, we've got 18 months under our belt, and we actually have some things to kind of talk about in terms of like, what have we done first, and we haven't even gotten to the part about really building our social media presence and community. Like we're just sort of dabbling in that now, but uh, in our next episode, we'll kind of talk about the first big step that we took, because you can't have any movies without a screenplay. It all
That's
starts with a
correct.
screenplay.
Yeah.
So,
So let's
hopefully
talk about
people come
Anora real
back and.
quick. Let's
Oh yeah.
let's dive into that. Let's unpack Anora and
Have
kind
you
of.
got some factoids there? Like,
I do. The as we said before, the budget was $6 million. The Oscar campaign cost $18 million. The domestic opening was only $500,000. Like,
yeah,
opening weekend, opening week, whatever. Like, really kind of underperformed. The domestic total was $20 million. So that still doesn't even cover the film and P&A. Because remember, the box office, $20 million. What do you take in? 60% of that, maybe 50 to 60%.
Well, it depends on if it's domestic or foreign. Like,
that was domestic. So
yeah, you're getting a little bit more of the domestic, so you could maybe call it 55 or 60%.
60.
But
the grand total, so gross worldwide, was $57 million.
So you could pretty much cut that in half. If you just cut the worldwide in half, you're probably
28-ish, right? 25 plus 2, 27.
So 18 and 6, 24. Let's say they spent, like, they really, I mean, they
kind of broke even, or maybe lost a little on that.
They probably broke even there, and then, who knows what they got on a deal.
They probably got
to be on a
streaming.
Streamer.
Yeah, they
probably got a decent deal.
Yeah, they at least made a few million on the streaming, just because it's an Oscar, and it's.
But that's
probably
it. But that's
in high demand.
Yeah,
50%.
Well, and if you think about this, if the company hadn't, if the distribution or production company hadn't thought that they had something special on their hands,
right,
and hadn't spent the $18 million, well, then even the $6 million they would have lost, because, at $500,000, even at a 10 times multiplier, which would be a lot for a domestic box office run, you're just not anywhere. You're not anywhere close. Like, well, you are close, but if you count whatever little you did spend on P&A, like, let's say you spent $2 million or $3 million, and you're up to $9 million, and you only make like $5 million. Well, then you're in the hole for. Like, I mean, it's just
And the
tough.
Oscar really was the factor that drove them to kind of that $57 million. There was a 310% increase in sales in the week following the Oscar win. So they got a 3x increase in sales, which means, if they were at 10 million, they got to 40 million, right? They did 30 million on 10 is a 3x increase. So that had they not won the Oscar, would they've even gotten to what they got, which is very interesting. So,
well, and I think, that's something that, you and I have to think about in terms of, like, in a way, Anora is kind of a comedy, like, kind of like it is funny.
Let me ask you this. Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked it. I don't think in the 90s or the 80s it would have been a Best Picture winner. I mean,
no,
it has things that are fun in it. She's very likable.
Really? I didn't like her.
I think she's likable. I mean, I think I guess let me make sure that I'm framing that properly. I think the actress is really likable. Like, she's charismatic. She's got good energy.
Yes, I think the acting was very well done.
Yeah,
I did not like the character. And I didn't like the ending. Spoiler alert. I did not like the ending at all. I get it that it's, some people like a story that kind of ends realistically. I believe that movies in particular, I think that they should have some sort of redeeming quality at the end. Either it makes you feel good, or the character finds something about themselves and changes behavior and makes themselves better. Like, this notion of, like, I don't know, it didn't sit right with me.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because
I think it's a true reflection of human behavior, but, like, that's not why I go to the movies. I can hear about that in the news, or,
when you talk to
media.
people like when you listen to, like, Quentin Tarantino and what, he kind of talks about, and I love Quentin Tarantino. I'm a huge fan of his, but he loves, movies from, the 60s and 70s. And then, of course, like, also, I guess he really likes the movies from sort of the revolution that he talked about that you see in the 90s, which actually I think is a nice blend. But in the 70s, before you get to, Rocky and Star Wars and those sort of things, there's a lot of sort of nihilism in a lot of the films, and cynicism, right? Like, there's a lot of these movies that have sort of ambiguous or dark endings, and or are very gritty, and
I mean, look at
realistic and that sort of stuff.
Scorsese and his films. He's got De Niro beating up his wife, and is just like he kind of explores this very dark side of humanity.
What's interesting is that and there are so many of those movies that are all-time great classic movies. But what's interesting is that the movies that sort of launch the 80s, if you will, were different. Like, they were really different. They were very positive. They were very life affirming. And those were the movies that sort of became, they were very fun, right? Those were the movies that became, I guess, what you would consider the very first or modern blockbusters, right? They're huge because there's this broad appeal, and, people who don't want to feel like they went to the movies and got punched in the face for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like, went and left and went home feeling great, and feeling good. And I think the 90s were a great example, and even the early aughts of a nice balance where you had movies coming out that were, a bit more gritty, a bit more cynical, but you also had movies coming out that were a whole lot of fun and just big spectacle. And I think you start to see problems when you go too far one way or the other with everything that you produce. Like, and that's why I think a script first sort of approach, like what we want to have, is is a great way to go, because it leaves open the opportunity for an artist to express what they want to express. And some artists want to create things that are fun. Like, and they don't want to necessarily make some sort of commentary on society or the world or whatever. And whereas other people come in with a really gritty, kind of like, very deep take on something. And, if you're able to budget those things responsibly and have a nice mix, the audience can find what they want. But I do think you've got to have,
a good story.
It's trouble when you get too far on one end or the other of the spectrum. Too far on that 70s,
I think that's my beef with Anora, is that I think the story overall was good, but the ending just kind of left you with like, well, so what's going to happen? Did she change?
Well,
is she going to be any better?
Yeah.
Is like she just going to do it again? Like that? Like you kind of had this roller coaster of emotion that she went through in a matter of, I think, a few weeks. Like, is maybe, if that, a week. Like the timeline of the actual film was very short.
They described it as like the gritty Pretty Woman. But the film was filmed in the 80s, and therefore that was not going to be the ending. And I would wager to say, I bet you it's possible if Anora had a happier ending, it might have made more money. Now, that's not the story that the artist wanted to tell. And so, that's okay that it doesn't end that way. But I would wager to say, if it had a happier ending, it would have made more money. Because it is, like, for a large part of the movie, it's a very fun kind of romp. Like, and there is a lot of wish fulfillment in there. It's just, the wish turns into a nightmare at some point. And I still love the very sweet Russian bodyguard guy. Like,
I think, like,
he was like the best.
He was the best
character in the film.
I think
his performance was great.
His very
his
nuanced
comedy was great.
Yeah, it was.
And he's very sweet. At the end, he tries to do the sweet gesture, and I understand why you don't like the end of the film, but like,
it kind of blows up in his face, and it's like,
yeah, and I think that it's okay to. I think it's okay to have that be the ending, but there's something to think about in terms of, like, if you'd kept the wish fulfillment going, maybe the movie would have been less honest, but maybe it would have made more money. And that's, it's just something to think about. But I think the script was good, and it all starts with a script. And I think that that's what we'll talk about in the next episode. So hopefully you've enjoyed our first kind of, half hour, 40 minutes. We'll be back again soon with another episode, and come back and follow us along on our adventure.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.